September 27, 1962. Backstage at the Sands Hotel Copa Room, Las Vegas. The air is electric with the ghost of applause still ringing in the walls from the final bow. Sinatra is gone, Lawford is gone, only two men remain. Sammy Davis Jr., the sweat beading on his brow not just from the lights, pours 2 glasses of bourbon. His hand trembles just slightly. Ice clinks like a warning. He turns to face the only man left in the room, Dean Martin. The man who just spent 90 minutes on stage making him laugh. Dean is already loosening his tie, the easy, liquid smile fading from his face as he reads the terror in Sammy's eyes. This is not a conversation. This is a confession. Sammy speaks 3 sentences, and as the words leave his lips, the unbreakable bond of the Rat Pack, the laughter, the loyalty, the "You're my brother" vows toasted in 1,000 hotel bars, shatters into silence. Dean doesn't shout. He doesn't swing. He just freezes. Then he sets down his untouched glass, picks up his coat, and walks out. He would never look at Sammy the same way again. What could one man confess to another that would kill a friendship that defined an era? The truth is not in the words he said. The truth is in the debt he could never repay. And tonight, for the first time, we go back to where that debt began. In a Las Vegas alley in the dead of night with a gun pressed to Sammy Davis Jr.'s head. To understand the weight of that confession, you have to first understand the paradise they built. The early 1960s, the summit at the Sands, Sinatra, Dean, Sammy, Joey, Peter, 5 kings ruling a casino kingdom of their own making. The stage was a playground, a private joke shared with a room full of 800 guests. They were more than a show. They were a state of mind, a fantasy of endless night, bottomless drinks, and brotherhood sold at the box office. And at the heart of that fantasy, its purest, most unlikely expression, was the bond between Dino and Sammy. Dean, the effortless, impossible cool, the man who seemed to glide through life untouched by its gravity, and Sammy, a supernova of talent, compensating for a world that told him he was less than with a performance that was more than anyone could ever be. Dean was his anchor. In the pressurized, racially charged glamour of Las Vegas, Dean's arm around Sammy's shoulder wasn't just a gesture. It was a shield, a public declaration. This is my friend, you will treat him as you treat me. They were Abbott and Costello for the jet set, their chemistry a beautiful, chaotic symphony of ad-libs and insults that never drew blood, only love, or so it seemed. Because behind the gold lame curtain the foundation was already cracking. You see, Dean Martin's cool was not an act. It was a philosophy, a deliberate, hard-won detachment from the messy business of caring too much. He'd seen the machinery of fame, the backroom deals, the emotional toll. His loyalty was a fortress, rarely given, and its gates were guarded by one simple law: you don't bring the darkness to my door. My public life is the act. My private life is sacred. Keep the chaos out here with the cameras. Sammy Davis Jr., by the brutal necessity of his existence, lived in chaos. He was navigating a minefield Dean could barely comprehend. Death threats for dating white starlets, newspaper headlines dissecting his every move, the mob-owned clubs that paid him in one hand and humiliated him with the other. Sammy carried the pressure like a second skeleton, and he leaned, hard asterisk, on Dean's apparent indifference, mistaking it for invincibility. He believed Dean's world was impervious. But Dean's world was a carefully maintained illusion, and Sammy was about to bring a tempest crashing through the front gate. The first fracture was almost invisible. 1960. Sammy, desperate to marry the Swedish actress May-Britt, faced an onslaught of hate mail and studio pressure so severe it threatened to end his career. He went to the clan, his brothers. Sinatra, ever the general, advocated public defiance. A grand stand. Dean listened, sipping his drink. His advice was simpler, quieter. Do what's in your heart, Pally, but do it quietly. For Sammy, quiet was not an option. His love, like his talent, had to be a spectacle, a defiance. He chose the grand stand. The wedding was a media siege. And though Dean stood there as best man, a fixed smile on his face, those close to him saw the flicker. The first hint that Sammy's desperate need to fight his battles was at odds with Dean's deep desire to avoid battles altogether. Dean's loyalty was being drafted into a war he never enlisted in, but this was just a skirmish. The real war was coming. and it would be waged not in the newspapers, but in the shadowed back offices of the very casinos they ruled. Las Vegas in the 60s was a beautiful desert rose with roots sunk deep into poisoned soil. The men who owned the dirt, the casinos, the cops, and the politicians were not studio heads. They were something else, and they adored the Rat Pack. They filled the rooms, they laughed the loudest, and they expected a certain reciprocity. For Sinatra, these relationships were complex, a dance of mutual exploitation. For Dean, they were a necessary evil, a transaction. You smile for me, I'll smile for you, we keep the machinery oiled and moving. But for Sammy, it was a survival pact signed in blood before he even knew the price. His astronomical success on the Strip was not just due to his talent, it was underwritten. Early on, a powerful, feared man had taken a liking to him, had smoothed over problems, had made him feel protected. This patronage came with an invisible, compounding interest. And by 1962, the bill was due. The pressure began to close in like walls. Whispers backstage would stop when Sammy entered, phone calls at odd hours, a certain car parked outside his hotel for too long. The easy laughter with certain associates now carried a metallic edge of obligation. Sammy was trapped. He had woven himself into the very fabric of the dark side of their glamorous world, and now it was tightening around him like a shroud. He tried to carry it alone, but the terror was a stain seeping through his impeccable performance. Dean saw it. Of course he saw it. He'd see Sammy finish a number, the grin wide as the Sahara, and then retreat to the wings, his whole body slumping as if the weight of the universe had just landed on his shoulders. Dean would offer a quiet, "Everything okay, Pally," and Sammy would force the light back into his eyes. Everything's copacetic, Dino, always is. But it was. And Dean, the master of evasion, knew a lie when he heard one. He just chose for a while to believe it. Because the alternative was to look into the abyss. And Dean Martin spent a lifetime building a paradise so he would never have to look into the abyss. But the abyss has a way of finding you. The specifics of the debt, that's where the whispers live. The story that filters through the old-timers, the bodyguards who have outlived their bosses, the musicians who heard the fights after the last set. It involved a favor called in, not for money, something more valuable, influence. A terrible, irrevocable act of pressure Sammy was ordered to apply to someone Dean cared about. A piece of moral territory Sammy was ordered to seize and surrender. It was the ultimate corruption of his position in the pack. They weren't just using Sammy. They were using Sammy asterisk to get to Dean asterisk, to twist the one pure thing in his life into a weapon. And Sammy, terrified for his life, his family, his very existence, had complied. He had become the vector. The story we are unearthing here at Hollywood Untold Files isn't just about a friendship's end. It's about how the machine of old Hollywood and old Vegas didn't just chew people up. It made them betray the only people who ever loved them. It turned brother against brother, not with a fist, but with a whispered threat in a dark room. The night of the confession, the final show, had been a masterpiece. They were flying. Dean was drunker than usual, which made him funnier, more loose. He draped himself over Sammy during Sam's song, mocking his sweating, his relentless energy. The crowd roared. It felt like old times, it felt like forever, but backstage the air changed. The hangers-on dissipated, drawn to Sinatra's suite for the real party, and Sammy asked Dean to stay, just for a minute. This is where we picture it. The empty chairs, the abandoned instruments, the lingering scent of smoke and ambition. Sammy pours the bourbon. The confession isn't long. It's not a detailed chronicle. It's a burst of toxic truth compressed into a few agonizing sentences. According to a road manager who waited outside that door and who finally spoke on his deathbed, it went something like this. "Dino, what they have on me, it's bad. I've done things for them. And the last thing, it involved you. They made me part of it. I'm so sorry. I'm in so deep I don't see a way out." Silence, not the comfortable silence of two friends. The silence of a vacuum sucking all the air, all the light, all the years of trust out of the room. Dean's face, usually a map of easy amusement, went blank, not angry, empty. He saw not his friend in trouble, but a breach in the fortress, a crack in the paradise. Sammy had not just asterisk had trouble, he had asterisk become asterisk trouble. And worse, He had allowed that trouble to cross the sacred threshold into Dean's life. He had broken the one law. In that moment, Dean didn't see the fear in Sammy's eyes. He saw the reflection of the men in the shadows. He saw the ugliness he'd spent a career outrunning, now sitting in his dressing room wearing his friend's face. The forgiveness wasn't the point. The contamination was. When Dean set that glass down and walked out, he wasn't abandoning Sammy. He was performing a quarantine. The aftermath was a slow, cold death performed in the blazing lights of the stage. There were no screaming headlines, no public feud. That was for mortals. The Rat Pack continued to perform, but the chemistry curdled. The ad-libs now had a serrated edge. Where Dean's insults were once draped in affection, now they carried a chill. He'd call Sammy Smokey, and the smile wouldn't reach his eyes. He'd physically turn his back a half-second sooner after a bit. Offstage, the invitations to golf, to dinner, to the sacred ground of Dean's home ceased. Sammy was now a professional colleague. A brilliant, troubled, dangerous professional colleague. He was left to navigate the quicksand alone, the one thing he'd always feared most. Dean's loyalty, that unshakable shield, had been revoked, and Sammy spent the rest of his life trying to earn back what could never be repaired, the uncomplicated safety of that brotherhood. Years later, at a charity event in the late 70s, long after the pack had scattered, a photographer caught them in a corner. Sammy, older, the frantic energy dimmed to an ember, is speaking earnestly, his hand on Dean's arm. Dean is looking away over Sammy's shoulder at the exit. His body is angled toward the door. The picture is worth 1,000 words, but only one matters: gone. The friendship was gone. Dean passed away in 1995, carrying his silences to the grave. Sammy followed in 1990, having written in his autobiography about many pains, but never this one. Never the true cost of that night. The confession was the grenade, but the pin had been pulled years earlier, in a world that offered a black superstar protection only at the price of his soul, and then demanded he pay with the heart of his best friend. What did Sammy Davis Jr. confess to Dean Martin? He confessed that the world they joked about on stage, the world of gangsters and pressure and moral compromise, was real, and that he was not its victim but its agent. He confessed that the darkness outside had gotten inside him, and in doing so, he forced Dean to see the reflection of that darkness in his own carefully polished paradise. It wasn't the confession of a sin that ended the friendship. It was the confession of a reality. A reality Dean had built his entire life, his entire persona, to deny. In the end, Sammy didn't just lose Dean. He became the living proof that Dean's greatest fear was true, that no one, no matter how much you love them, can outrun the rot, that in the golden age of Hollywood, even the purest bond could be bought, sold, and collateralized by men in the shadows. And sometimes the most devastating thing a friend can say is simply the truth. If you're still here, you understand. Some stories aren't told for nostalgia. They're told as a warning etched in the neon glow of a forgotten Las Vegas marquee. This is Hollywood Untold Files. We dig where they buried the light. If you believe these stories should never die, stay with us. Subscribe. Share this with someone who thinks they know the old Hollywood legends, because the legend was the lie. The truth was in the silence after the last laugh faded.